Thank you for your patience. We're going to begin this evening's program, and I will start by introducing Rabbi Menachem Penna. Because Robertson Penna is not here yet, she'll be here in a moment, and I'll introduce her, although I suspect she knows who she is. She knows who she is. Rabbi Menachem Penna is the Dean of Rates, the Rabbi Yitzhak Elchanan Theological Seminary at Yeshiva University, where he himself received smicha. Before this, Rabbi Penna was the spiritual leader of Young Israel of Hollywood Queens 20 years and is now their Rabbi Emeritus. He is the founder and chairman of the board of Kesher families. Rabbi Robertson Penna conducts several sessions for Kesher families, and I'm sure we will be hearing a great deal more about that organization. Robertson Adina Penna, who will be here in just a moment, served alongside Rabbi Penna as the Robertson of Young Israel of Hollywood for 20 years. She has a bachelor's in psychology from Stern and a master's degree in occupational therapy. She is a valued resource for many in the Jewish community and is the president of Kesher Families, the organization supporting families and individuals who identify as LGBTQ+ within the Orthodox community. We're going to begin with I'm going to start with a question that was asked, and Adina, you mentioned this. You said that you had suspected Gedalia might be different in this way. One of the questions we have is, does it ever make sense to initiate a conversation about these issues with a child or with a student? Or is it better to let them start the conversation?
But I think that if you have a child that you suspect might be struggling, and they're not saying anything, first of all, I think it's good to always lay the groundwork, because as we said, to be open to conversations of all sorts with our children. If there's any way that we could get that message across to our children that we're safe people to talk to, every child should feel that his parent is a safe person to talk to under any circumstances. So I think that's a message that there's so many different issues that kids are dealing with these days. So I think it's just such an important issue in general and an important message in general to get out there to our kids. But if you do have a specific concern and you think that they might be struggling with this, I think that it probably would be a good idea. I guess it always depends on your particular relationship with your child. But just you could say to a kid, it seems to me that you might be struggling with something. I'm not sure what it is, and I'm not sure if it's something that you want to talk to me about. But I want you to know that you can feel comfortable to talk to me, but if for whatever reason you're not, would you like to talk to someone and offer them, would you like to talk to a therapist? Would you like to talk to a rabbi? Somebody, would you like to talk to somebody? Open it up, and that's a normal thing, and we should normalize that for our kids, that sometimes there are things that they might struggle with that they can't tackle on their own. That's okay. Adults also, it's not just kids. We all should be able to be in that place where we know when we have something, we're faced with something that we can't tackle on our own, and we might need a little bit, of help with. So I would say if you suspect, I would try to, to offer them, to say that you're noticing that they might be, not feeling right or struggling with something, and perhaps they would, want to talk again, whether it's you or someone else. I don't see why, one cannot or should not do that.
Okay, thank you. So the next question was asked about the relationship of a child to the Orthodox community. I think for many people, it's challenging to realize that you can be gay and frum. This is where you grew up. This is where you grew up. But we do have at least two questions about how to help children think about remaining part of the Orthodox community, or when it's so clear to them that the community rule book doesn't want them. So do you have any thoughts and guidance about that relationship between some of these cases in which there's a strong feeling that they want to remain within the community, and others in which that's less strong?
So I think a lot of things are blamed on the Orthodox community. First of all, I think I don't think it should be so clear that the Orthodox community is not accepting of people who are LGBTQ. I think there's a lot more acceptance out there than there was. I also think that people sometimes confuse the Orthodox community with the Ribono Shel Olam. Ribono Shel Olam, again, doesn't need my haskama. He said that a certain act is prohibited. That doesn't mean that he hates people. He hates his own creations. People don't hate their own children. But sometimes people who are LGBTQ confuse the fact that something may not be allowed in halacha with the fact that the Orthodox community doesn't like them. It's okay to be angry at God. It's not exactly the same thing as being angry at the community. Now, I'm not saying that there aren't challenges, but I do think that we need to, first of all, change that perspective. I don't think the communities as a whole are that opposed. Just because there are some limits in a shul doesn't mean that they're not welcoming. There may be some limits, and those are difficult to accept. That there are limits, but I don't think that's necessarily true. And I think that sometimes it can be perceived. Sometimes when we'll sit with a group of parents who are very angry and say, my shul doesn't accept my son, and I'll say, in what way? They can't really explain why. Part of it is because we are homophobic by nature, and that's true, and maybe a traditional community is more homophobic. Part of it is that we may be reflecting what we assume people are thinking about us. The community is changing somewhat in terms of the way they view some of these individuals. As important, I try to say to a young man who sits in front of me in my office, and it's not uncommon, that there's a difference between your relationship with the Orthodox community and your relationship with God and Torah and Orthodoxy. We don't follow the Torah, we don't daven because we happen to like the Orthodox community. Yes, there is an element of orthopraxy and all this and that, but I'll have someone come and say to me, I don't see how I could daven in an Orthodox shul because I don't think I'll be welcome there with my husband. And I'll say to him, okay, I can hear that. It's hard to be somewhere where you don't feel like you fit in. So daven in the conservative shul on Shabbos morning. But there's 178, I think, hours of the week. Why can't you have an Orthodox relationship with God for the other 176 hours? Because you find that the shul that you feel most comfortable in isn't an Orthodox synagogue. I think people very much confuse it. You're not Orthodox or not. It's not that you don't like the community. So sometimes you don't like the community even if you are Orthodox and you don't like your Orthodox community. You shouldn't confuse the two. Not only should you not confuse the observance of one mitzvah with the observance of the rest of the mitzvahs, which the Rambam clearly said to the Jews of Yemen many years ago in the Iker and Teman, that even if there is a mitzvah that you feel you cannot keep that has nothing to do with the other 612, but more than that, you shouldn't confuse your relationship with the community and your relationship with the Ribono Shel Olam. And I try to challenge the young men to stay as firm as they can, regardless of how they can do this, and regardless of their connection to this or that Orthodox community. Don't give up kashrus in the home because you feel uncomfortable in the Orthodox synagogue. One is between you and the community, and the other is between you and God. Don't get me wrong. I'm not minimizing the anger that many feel towards the Ribono Shel Olam. And I'm not minimizing how a person can feel rejected by a Kadosh Baruch Hu, not only the Orthodox community. So it's not so simple, but they certainly should divide between the two.
Thank you. We have a couple of questions about the choice of therapists. What lessons have you learned that you can share about who might be the best fit for children within our community or LGBTQ? And can you say a very brief word about conversion therapy?
I'll take that for the ladies in the room. That's what we're related to. Therapist, it's a good question. I don't think that a therapist necessarily, this is generally a question, should a person from a frum community go to a frum therapist? We've discussed a lot at Nefesh conferences and other conferences for frum mental health professionals. I do think that there's value, of course, in seeing a therapist who's culturally sensitive and understands what it is. Being gay in the wider society is very different than being gay in the Orthodox Jewish community. So I certainly think you want to go to a person who is sensitive to what it means and the way it plays out and But there's something else, and I say this with great trepidation. There is the LGBTQ individual, and there is an LGBTQ movement and world, etc. Our son was, as far as we could tell, never attracted to a girl. That's what he claims, and again, nothing that he ever did would ever indicate the opposite. He went through years of reparative therapy, and just to touch upon that for a second, I'm going to say something that's maybe controversial. I think that if reparative therapy worked, there might be an obligation to pursue it, or there might be a desire to pursue it. I don't have a moral problem with reparative therapy. Factually, I've yet to meet a single person, we've met with many, many hundreds of people, who ever found that it worked. Society has an ethical problem with it, whether that's something that should be changed. I think that within a Torah framework, the ability to live a more typical Jewish life and to get married and to have a family in a typical way are all reasons to undergo difficult things to make that change. We just don't know anyone, a single person, who's ever been able to change because of that. We ask you, many of you, I assume there's some in this crowd who are LGBTQ, in every crowd, not simply because of the topic. If you are straight, could you imagine becoming gay? It's really no different. We don't seem to be able to change sexuality. So that's my feeling about therapy. I wouldn't put somebody through it if it is very difficult. And again, we still haven't found anyone. That doesn't mean people shouldn't see therapy. Every one of us, I see a therapist. You should see a therapist. Everybody should see a therapist. That's good. We live in a complicated world. And certainly someone whose entire view of what they were going to be with their future has changed. Of course you should be seeing a therapist. But I don't know about particularly that. But just to continue with my controversial remarks, sexuality isn't all or nothing. There are people who are completely gay, and there are people who are bisexual. What do you do if your child is bisexual? So I would think, if I didn't know the field, that being bisexual means you have either option in front of you, and it's 50-50, or whatever the attraction is, and of course, you would want to try to meet someone of the opposite sex. It's easier, halachically it's permitted, etc., etc. However, we live in a world that's a little bit topsy-turvy. Within the world, within some segments of the community, you're considered to be a sellout if you're bisexual and you only act on one half of your sexual desires. And if anything, it's considered to be better to choose the homosexual option, to emphasize what's different about you, than to go with the path that others are. And that's why there are dangers. In the world of transgender as well, I think there are individuals, we've certainly met individuals who, as hard as it is for us to understand or accept, absolutely seem to believe they're in the wrong body. Is that a mental illness? Is that a reality? What's mental illness anyway? It's something that I absolutely believe. I don't think there's really any kind of difference there. It's not going to change. But then there are many people who just aren't sure. One of the challenges that we have is to sort of be sucked up into this movement of people who emphasize what makes them different. And you have a person who could kind of go either way on gender, on sexuality, but they're caught up in this movement that says, be different. And that can sometimes be dangerous. It's unnecessary. It's unnecessary to head in that direction. And that's why if you end up with a therapist or a group that's activist, and it's hard to keep kids away from anything today, certainly that they feel is central to who they're going to be. But if you end up with a therapist who's activist, you could be pushing a child really into a world that they don't need to be in. Again, I know that's a little controversial to say, but that is the world we live in. Believe it or not, in many parts of society, it is preferable to be homosexual than heterosexual. There is people look down on heterosexuals. What's wrong with you? If you can't believe that, thank God you live in Silver Spring. Come to me. But we have to be careful at the same time. So we want to be able to give them the support they need. We're not looking for someone to give them mussar. They know, the kids know. the Torah says. But we do want someone who's also not going to push them to emphasize their difference when there's also a part of them that's really able to live one second.
Thank you. Could either of you speak to any differences that you may have noticed between Gedaliah's story as a man and women in the community with similar struggles? How different are they? Obviously, your guiding principles remain your guiding principles, but do you have any words for people who are in that situation with loved ones?
You're saying in terms of girls?
Yes. If they're...
It's interesting. Sometimes it's a little bit simpler for the girls. How would you say it is? Right. So in other words, technically one can divide in terms of the act itself. According to most authorities, not all, but according to most authorities, the prohibited act that is really the concern, one that's mentioned in Torah, applies to men. It doesn't apply to women. I would think that the community would therefore look differently upon two men who get married. And again, we don't know exactly what's going on in any bedroom, but marriage is marriage. A person takes the step to publicly get married. It's also not reasonable to assume nothing is going on when a couple gets married. I would think that there should be a difference between the way we look at two men, and the way we look at two women, understanding that according to most what the women are doing, could be a rabbinic prohibition. However, we were only over anyone in the shul or rabbinic prohibitions. Interestingly, the LGBT community doesn't support that difference. There's sort of an alliance amongst all these individuals who feel different, who feel left out, who feel different sexually and in gender, and they actually resist that differentiation. And I brought that up. Interesting situation, both to sort of speak with groups of rabbis and groups of individuals who identify as LGBTQ. When I meet with the individuals themselves, they resist that kind of, they sort of bond together and they want to sort of be treated similarly. So, in terms of the experience itself, the homophobia, the way that things play out in school, the way rabbis speak and the way mechanchos speak and this and that, I think that's pretty much the same.
I'm also, I think, with the families, I don't think we see the big difference in terms of how families respond. I don't think if they respond anyway, if it's a son or if it's a daughter, I think it's all, pretty much the same.
Okay, I want us to take a minute or two to open up questions from the audience. Please make sure that you ask a question, and if you can keep it brief so that we can get as many.
But there is nothing you can't ask.
Please.
We may not answer, but there's nothing you can't.
Please.
Do you want me to say that?
Yeah.
Just speak loud, so everyone can.
So I have a girlfriend, and her son went to YU, and at YU he met another man, also Orthodox, and they got married. And when the time came to deal with attending a wedding, the Baltimore rabbis that they consulted said the parents were not allowed to attend the wedding of the son. And so the siblings and their spouses went, but the parents did not. And so my question to you is, what is going on with regards to, is there a consensus amongst the Rebbeim as to how to handle a situation like that, or is it very case by case? Like, what have you found when weddings crop up?
I think my wife wants to answer. The consensus is that it's case by case. That's really the consensus, is that it's case by case. What we tell families, first of all, there's reason why certain people tower above others in terms of their knowledge of Torah and their ability to give guidance on this. This is something that requires pretty big shoulders. We get asked this question once a week, at least, but we don't give a solid answer because I'm not a posek, and Adina is so far not a posek. But I'll tell you what we actually tell families. We say that there are three factors here. The first is that there is an element clearly of Chelul Hashem. and that you just can't get around that there is a level of Chil Hashem. I think that the community embracing and all this and that is there is that level. And whether it's Chil Hashem, whether it's helping people do something that is prohibited, that's something. There's another factor, which is that it's not their fault, and they do the best they can. I want to support them. That one we try to take off the table. In other words, we don't advise people that they should go to a wedding because they feel bad. At the end of the day, what they're doing, even if it's not their fault, and even if we would do the same thing, is something that we can't and we shouldn't condone. And that very often takes them. We get questions from friends from Rabbanim who say, we want to go and we want to support them. And the answer is, this is probably not something to ultimately support. Doesn't mean you're judging them. It doesn't mean you're scolding them. It just means that it's not something. There's a third factor, which is, what does this mean for your relationship with them? And what does this mean for the future of the person, et cetera, et cetera. And that is a halachic factor. In other words, so there are three issues. There's the Chil Hashem factor. That's a halachic factor. There's the, what does this mean for the future of the person and your relationship and your family? That's a halachic factor. There's the, I feel bad for the person, which even though that's a natural instinct, and we all do, probably isn't ultimately a halachic factor. How do you weigh the Chil Hashem aspects versus the I need to stay in a relationship with them? That's what's difficult, and that's why really you need advice, and you also need to speak to someone objective. That's what there are those who feel, there are rabbis who feel that Chil Hashem is just something you can't get around, and there are rabbis who feel that parents are parents, and they go to their kids' things. It's just not that's what you do as a parent. You go. You don't have to be at the center of the thing. You don't have to whatever. But it's difficult. I don't think that there will be consensus, as difficult as that is on many of these issues. I think they'll remain case to case. The biggest question is, what is the person supposed to do with their life? And there won't be consensus. You're not going to have books written saying what to do. It's going to have to be kind of, one by one. Eventually, I think patterns will develop in the community, and we'll see where that goes.
I just want to add, though, that I think that's very important also, when a person is faced with such a question, and they really have to figure it out for themselves, to make sure that they're going to a Rav who's holding in these issues, who actually really understands them. Not everybody does yet. A lot of them really don't. So you want to make sure that you're speaking to somebody who really understands the issues, and also who, can have an understanding of your family, what it means for your family. There are a lot of issues to be fleshed out when you're asking such a shaila. So, I think you have to know who you're going to when you can answer and be sensitive.
I'll just say one other thing. When our son was getting married, we asked 4 rabbis who we have long-standing relationships with, who felt that knew us, knew the issue. The question was, do we go to the wedding? Do we not go to the wedding? It was a yes or no question. We got 4 answers. 4 completely different answers to the question. By the third one, we were laughing when we were on the speakerphone. By the fourth one, we couldn't hold it. How could it be that 4 people that we trusted and were basically Orthodox rabbis said 4 things that were so very different? In the end, he got married at the height of COVID, so we really didn't have to, most of those theoretical questions weren't real, but it'll remain challenging. But halacha will get there. Doesn't mean it'll be lenient. Halacha will get there, but we're seeing a blip in a historic time. It's not clear where things are going.
So Edison kindly agreed to keep going. So,
okay, your ride home is about similar to ours, right?
so please, let's keep the questions on point so we can get as many as possible.
If I could please follow up.
Yeah.
In terms of the technicalities. Do you see a fundamental difference between, because you kept referring to marriage, kedushin, and a civil marriage?
Again, you're ultimately asking the wrong person, because again, I
don't have the shoulders to really weigh into this. All I can talk about is some of the factors. I have not spoken to, I have not heard from people much bigger than I, that there's much of a difference between a civil ceremony and a religious ceremony. It's still what it is. And again, it's complicated. It's very complicated, especially when it comes to parents and
Could you share the characteristics of the most supportive friends and family members you had? What the right way is to support people when their children come out, or how do you manage it when their child gets engaged and they are happy? Like, what's the right? I understand it's not everybody, but what were your the friends that really helped you the most? What did they do?
The friends that just are like normal. just be normal and just, first of all, a lot of people I think are just afraid to sometimes even broach the topic with you and even say anything. But like, I've heard people say like, it's very hurtful if somebody comes and starts asking about all your children and then doesn't ask you about that one child because they're afraid, they're a person too, they're my child too, and they have what to report on them. Also, be normal and just, ask about them and how they are. And if it's at the beginning of the process and you see, you could ask friends, how are you? How are you doing? If you need somebody, if you want to be, if you're that close, it's not going to be for everybody to play that role. But if you're a good friend and, the person knows it's coming, from a good place, to offer to be a support. I'm here to talk. I know, it must be difficult here. I'm here to talk. And, I think that's it. Acknowledge, you could acknowledge, if they're having a hard time. I mean, some people, everybody deals with it differently, and some people maybe aren't having, such a hard time, but just to be, to try to just be as normal of a friend as you can, I think.
I appreciate the compliment that you think that as a rabbi in Rebbetzin we have friends. It's a little difficult. We're speaking of others' experience, not ours. But I agree with my wife that it's really to try to, again, it doesn't mean you're celebrating. It just means that there's still people who use their names. Not your gay son. It's Gedalia. Gedalia is still Gedalia, whatever it is. And it really is very meaningful for me when people ask about how's Gedalia doing. Because his life doesn't come down to this one issue. He's still, beloved. As parents, in terms of what to, how to respond when your kid comes out. Baruch Hashem, we speak to so many parents. We're finding that parents are more aware of what it is and what it isn't. This is the kind of thing. Sometimes when we have these groups, these talks publicly, there are those who feel that it's best to talk just with the parents who have children that are LGBTQ. And besides the community issues, I think they're real parenting issues. If the first time that you're educated about what it means to be LGBTQ is when your child comes out, then as much as you try to respond properly, you're not going to be able to respond properly. So parents need to understand because, again, whatever number you take, it's a kid on every block. It's a kid on every single block. It's just not that uncommon. And I think parents, hearing about it, knowing about it beforehand is really important. We've found that the way a parent reacts when a child comes out to them can have a decade of consequences. A decade of consequences. We have families that it didn't go well that first day and they just were never able to put the pieces together. Fortunately, we used to have people calling us 2 years after their child came out. Now we have 2 days. Baruch Hashem, as more people know, we don't advertise, God forbid, because even if we could find someone that would take our advertisement, if we ever advertised, we'd be so paralyzed by phone calls that we wouldn't know what to do. So we don't advertise, but people are finding us. And it's very gratifying to know that the pain that we went through for 5 years without talking to anybody, people are reaching us within a couple of days. But even still, a couple of days may be too long if you don't know how to sort of, respond. And as I said before, and I'll end this question with this, something's going to happen with every one of our children. That's not a club. Something's going to happen. They're going to hit hard times. We have to share what we really feel about our children and about our beliefs long before we hit those roadblocks. We can't bring them up. You know, it's not that if the child needs to be reassured at that moment that the parents will still care about him or her, it's a little late. And it's hard to say it in so many words, and it sounds corny. And the fact is, the Jewish stuff also sounds corny. You know, when do you tell your kids how much Judaism means to you? And when is the right time to do that? That God is really, we have to say, first we have to say the G word. Hashem is Uncle Moshe language, really. There's nothing, I like Uncle Moshe, you know, but use the word God. Like, do we ever talk to our kids about God? Do we ever tell them what we believe? They hear all the complaints. They hear all the stuff we don't like. So why are we doing it? So it's just more of a reason to invest in those relationships as much as we can to make sure that they should be able to sort of guess how we're going to respond if we've been doing it right. We didn't do it right, but now we know how to advise others. But they should be able to guess, you know, based on, you know, what things mean, you know, what things are important to you. Dr. Pelkovitz always speaks about it as every family sort of has their bumper stickers. And it's important to have those bumper stickers. Your kids, your grandkids should know what you stand for. They should know that. And while kids are very, very perceptive, and they are, there's nothing that replaces actually saying it. You know, whether you say it at the Seder, I think that's probably the most important night of the year, to express those things. It's not about a year to talk about gematrias of karpas. God, it's the most important night of the year. Who has time to hear every kid say everything in their notebook? Tell your kids, I believe in God. I believe God controls history. I am so happy to be able to be at a Seder. This is what gives me meaning. Say that every year at the Seder, every year at Rosh Hashanah. You know, the more that we express that stuff beforehand, the less backtracking we'll have to do. You know, once we hit those moments. We're trying it on our grandchildren. We're trying it on our grandchildren.
Thank you. Good, John?
Yeah.
Nice enough.
I'll talk about, can you talk about how you approach your relationship with the audience partner?
Okay.
Slowly. I guess, to be honest, right, it was a little bit difficult, you know, at the beginning. There's a couple times, you know, that we met him, but I think the first thing was that I brought him home at a certain point for, you know, just to the house, you know, to have like a breakfast together or something like that. So it was slowly, you know, getting to know him and you know, getting accustomed, you know, to the whole thing. And to be honest, like obviously, like it was uncomfortable at the beginning, but most I could say is that we get used to anything. You know, you adapt to different situations, you know, somewhat quickly. So, you know, while it was definitely challenging at the beginning and hard, you know, necessarily good to be in the room together, whatever. It was from him also. I think he was also nervous. It wasn't just us. I think he was also nervous. There was definitely, you know, a little bit of tension. But fortunate that, you know, he's a very, very good person and a very kind person and, you know, cares about our son very much and that, you know, just got to know him slowly, you know, over time and to, you know, to embrace him. You know, he's comes along with my son. He's part of our family at this point. So, you know, it was a slow process. But,
Yeah, I would second that. I mean, I think that if you told us 3 or 4 years ago that we could eat Shabbos dinner with our son's partner, our son's husband at the table, we'd say we'd want to be able to do that for some, but we wouldn't be able to do it. But the Rebbeinu Shalom allows you to. It doesn't mean we celebrate with them. It doesn't mean we call them on their anniversary. It's painful. It's difficult. We know there's a tension there, but at the same time, we've made him part of the family. At the end of the day, he's an imperfect person, as we all are, who's taking care of our child. I think HaKadosh Baruch Hu looks at me as an imperfect person who's taking care of his child. So he loves Gedalia, he takes care of Gedalia, and I think we love him for that. He's a very special person. He's brought Gedalia closer to Yiddishkeit, ironically. Gedalia is much closer to Yiddishkeit because of his partner. I would not have expected that that's what would have brought Gedalia had many years of doubts. And I think he's where he is in life religiously because of his partner. So we do the best. There are moments where it's very uncomfortable. There are moments where it's surreal. But it's our family. And that's what our family is. So.
Maybe we'll take these last two questions.
Two more questions. Yes.
I'm worried about schools. Like, it seems like we don't really have a curriculum or a way to speak to our students in school about some of the challenges of being LGBTQ, and I think that can create tension, student to student, student to teacher. Any thoughts?
It's really hard. I think the problem goes, I don't know what the solution is, let me be clear. And even though they say I'm the dean of some school in the Heights, I'm not an educator. No, I'm not. It's really very different what I do and what a high school principal does and what an education and elementary school principal does. The problem is we don't talk about sexuality at all. If you don't talk about sexuality at all, and I understand why we don't, but then you can't talk about homosexuality. So it's a really big challenge for schools. You can't just talk about homosexuality without talking about heterosexuality. But how do we kind of deal with that, that first issue? I do think that there's certain things that schools can do just to get certain things across to the kids. They don't have to understand homosexual relationships. It's important, first of all, to acknowledge that the kids are there. Teachers have asked me, can I teach about marriage anymore? Like, is it offensive to teach about marriage? And I say, of course you have to teach about marriage. The Torah has a lot to say about marriage. But before you teach it, you should say, I recognize that in this room there's probably individuals who have a different sexuality. And this may be tough for you. And I acknowledge that. And, we're going to proceed, but I'd be very happy. You don't need to stand up and you don't need to listen out, but I'd be happy to discuss it with you further. Just acknowledging that they're there is huge for the kids. Huge. They feel invisible. They feel like nobody's willing to admit it. So first of all, acknowledge that they're in the school. And the second thing is that bullying absolutely has to stop in general, but it has to stop in these kids. You know what? Bullying is bad, but don't bully the kid who thinks he has no future whatsoever. Bully somebody else. You shouldn't bully anybody, but seriously, the kid who's wondering, everybody else in the school thinks they have future X, and this kid is the rug pulled out from under him or her. And they don't know what their future is going to be. They're suffering in silence. That's the kid that you need to bully. I think a lot of kids don't understand that the word gay, you just don't say, oh, that's so gay. They don't mean that as a homophobic slur. They really don't. But you can't say that. You just can't. You just can't do that to these kids that are under so much stress already. So I think that the bullying, I think the understanding that kids don't choose their sexuality and that there are kids in the school with different sexuality, I think you could do that without really getting into sex education. I'm not saying we shouldn't, but I'm not really sure how to do it. I'm not an educator.
Okay, we're going to take one more question, but just before we do, let's remember that there is an organization. You can find it at which website?
Just Google Kesher Families, you'll find us. It's very easy to find us. And I'll give out, I have magnets.
We have magnets.
I'll give pens.
And bumper stickers for
If anybody can also contact us.
Yes, and you can also contact the Penners through Bickle. Okay, the Penners have a long drive home, so we'll take one more question. There was a question at the back.
Yeah, there was. It's very related to what you just said and might make this obsolete. But you had mentioned the importance of speaking to specific Rabbanim that are understanding in this area when asking specific shilos. Would you feel comfortable sharing their names and numbers in this setting? Because a lot of people are probably going to approach you afterward. I know I'll have my phone out if anyone else would want to share that, or would you prefer that people reach out to you specifically?
Yes, definitely reach out to us. We have to start mentioning names and violence stories. It is challenging. It is challenging. The reality is that those who are people who are younger tend to have a little bit more of an openness and an understanding to it. people who are older tend to have the total knowledge. You can't really skimp on either one. A 27-year-old who's graduating, smicha, or the Elio, who's a very nice fellow, and understands and has a friend who's gay, but is 27, is not going to be able to contribute to this conversation like someone who's 85. So it's really a collaborative process. It's really a collaborative process of rabbis and community members of different ages working together. You can't skimp on the broad Torah knowledge, but at the same time, we have to make sure to try to educate. My wife and I do what we can to speak to Rabbanim, even Rabbanim who wouldn't necessarily send their children to REITs, different sides. We've met with Rabbanim, pretty far to the right, and we're doing what we can. But we have to be patient. It's very, very hard as a family and an individual to be patient. We want results now, and we should want results now because our kids are suffering. But this is not a simple thing for the Jewish community to assimilate, to integrate, to figure out what to do. And it will take time. In the meantime, we have to be as non-judgmental as we can be. We need to be sensitive. We need to recognize that these things are complicated. It's just complicated. Complicated is okay. It's complicated. Anybody who thinks on any of these issues that the answer is X or Y just doesn't get it. It's complicated. The answer is somewhere in the middle. But we are happy to try to help if we can in this sort of strange middle position we are as a rabbi and a rebbitzin, but also Kedali's parents. Thank you so much.
That we have all been in the presence of moral masters, people who really are there to teach us from their experience and their wisdom. You spoke about the Rabbanu Shel Olam giving you the challenge of helping Gedalia. I think Gedalia was very lucky that the Rabbanu Shel Olam chose you to be his parents. And I am sure as he proceeds down his career and contribution both to his family life and to the Jewish people, he will look to his parents as remarkable role models of how to do that in the future. So thank you both.
I have to say that we're lucky that Gedalia is the person that he is because he's just an exceptional human being. He has always been, but whatever. It helps. It's a two-way street.
Helps to have good kids.
Thank you all for coming out and have a safe journey.